Hello and welcome back to the Deep Dive. We grab a whole stack of sources, dig through them, and pull out the really fascinating stuff just for you. Today, we're diving into something pretty profound, actually, a story that kind of challenges what many of us think about, well, the darker side of human nature. We're
Yeah.
calling it the world's first murder. Now, for a lot of people, the first thing that springs to mind, the cultural touchstone for that first deadly fight is probably the biblical story of Cain and Abel.
Yeah.
It's really deep in our collective memory, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And that's exactly why today's deep dive is, well, frankly, quite startling. Recent discoveries in archaeology are completely flipping that script. They're pushing the timeline for murder, actual murder, back hundreds of thousands of years, way, way before any biblical stories.
Hundreds of thousands.
Yes. We're talking about this huge leap back into really deep history. It basically forces us to rethink, early human aggression entirely.
That is just staggering to think about. Okay, so our mission today is to unpack this incredible evidence, right? Look at the science they used to figure this out, because that sounds amazing in itself. And then grapple with what this discovery, this ancient crime, might tell us about, well, us, about human nature. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
To really get how archaeologists are rewriting this story, we need to go way back, not just centuries, like you said, but hundreds of thousands of years. And it all centers on one key find, a skull, dated to an incredible 430,000 years ago. Just let that number sink in for a second.
It's almost impossible to really get your head around that kind of time depth, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really is. And when they found it, the skull wasn't complete, not at all. It was actually in 52 separate pieces, scattered.
52. Wow.
Yeah. So the archaeologists had this painstaking job of piecing it all back together, like the world's oldest and maybe most gruesome jigsaw puzzle.
Okay, so they piece it together.
I'll go off
And then when did it show? Well, once it was reassembled, the skull showed really clear signs of trauma, two distinct holes.
Right. 2 holes. And here's where it gets really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The forensic analysis suggested, quite strongly actually, that these 2 impacts seem to have been caused by the same object.
It's the same object
Yeah.
from nearly 500,000 years ago. How could they possibly tell that?
Well, this is where, modern science meets ancient history. It's fascinating stuff. They use techniques you'd recognize from, like, a modern crime scene investigation. Things like micro-CT scans that let them build this incredibly detailed 3D model of the skull, fractures and all. They could look at the angles, the depth of the wounds, and even things like digital microscopy to examine tiny marks, striations on the bone around the impacts. These act almost like tool marks, confirming it was likely one specific object used twice. It's how they bridge that huge time gap, using that kind of detail.
Okay, that's incredible. So the forensics were pretty conclusive then.
Yeah, remarkably so. They determined the injuries happened around the time of death, so not later damage. And crucially, they just weren't consistent with something like an accidental fall down a cliff or, into the cave.
Exactly. This wasn't some clumsy accident. The physics just didn't line up for that.
And there was more, wasn't there? Something even more chilling.
Yes. The context of where the skull was found, deep within this cave system, along with other remains, the evidence points towards the victim likely being thrown down a vertical shaft after receiving those fatal blows.
So killed intentionally and then disposed of.
That's what the evidence strongly suggests. It's not just a death. It feels like an intentional act, followed by, well, getting rid of the body.
Right. So this discovery, it's not just an old bone. It really shakes things up, doesn't it? It forces us to think differently about where human aggression even comes from. Let's dig into what this all means, the bigger implications. Definitely. There's a researcher, Dr. Sella, from the Joint Center for Evolution and Human Behavior in Madrid. She and her team worked extensively on this find. And their conclusion is pretty direct. This discovery shows that deliberate, lethal, interpersonal aggression, that's the definition of murder, right?
Yeah.
Is an incredibly ancient human behavior. It wasn't something that just popped up recently in our history.
That immediately makes me think of, the noble savage idea, that sort of romantic notion that early humans were peaceful, living in harmony with nature before society messed everything up.
Exactly.
This finding doesn't just chip away at that idea. It kind of blows it up, doesn't it?
It really does, because if you have clear evidence of intentional killing nearly 500,000 years ago, long before, complex societies, agriculture, property disputes as we know them,
Yeah.
it suggests that aggression, this kind of lethal violence, isn't just a side effect of civilization. It might be something woven into our story much, much earlier, maybe deeper.
Wow. Okay, so connecting that to the bigger picture then.
Well, it suggests that maybe aggression and violence are really deeply rooted parts of human history, not just, recent problems caused by society or stress. And that, I think, raises a really important question for you, for everyone listening. What does it tell us about ourselves, about humanity, if this kind of violence goes back that far, right to our ancient roots?
That is a heavy question. And this discovery, it opens up so many different ways to think about things. I mean, if you're interested in theology, you might look again at stories like Cain and Abel, but now with this much deeper historical context in mind.
Right, or the science.
Or the science, yeah. If you're into biology or chemistry, you could explore the amazing forensic techniques they used, how they get answers from something so incredibly old. And then there's archaeology and anthropology, obviously, looking at how murder and aggression show up across different societies throughout time and how finds like this change the theories.
Absolutely. Or even history. People debate whether the 20th century was the most violent. Well, evidence like this adds a whole new layer to that conversation about violence across human existence.
Definitely puts it in a different light. So, okay, wrapping up this deep dive, the key takeaway seems to be that the archaeological record, this ancient skull, has given us this really profound, maybe unsettling, new view on where human violence comes from. It places murder much, much earlier in the human story than we generally thought. It's a sobering piece of our past, but an essential one to understand.
It really is. And maybe that leaves us with this final kind of provocative thought to mull over. If this kind of lethal aggression, this capacity for murder, is an ancient human behavior going back almost 500,000 years, what does that really imply about the very nature of humanity? Is violence just this inescapable shadow in our past? Or maybe can understanding just how deep these roots go actually help us, navigate our present and future better? What does this ancient skull whisper to you about our shared human journey?